Chris, I saw that you got back on social media recently, like Facebook and Twitter and a couple other things.
I did. I'm back on Facebook, Twitter. I'm on Threads. I've been on Instagram for a while. TikTok. It's kind of crazy. I've been away from social media for about 7 years, and it's been good. It's been good coming back. It's been good reconnecting with people. I'm not quite sure I'm going to stay on Twitter because it's a little bit of a mess right now. But Threads is this amazing place, and
Awesome.
Facebook, I've really been able to reconnect with some people. So
That's
yeah.
great. The reason why I mentioned that is because recently on social media and other places, I saw an article where Microsoft had laid off one of their internal DEI teams, and it just did not sit right with me. And so I wanted to have a candid conversation about the importance of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Yeah, absolutely. So how do you describe DEI? Because it's got a lot of different definitions for people, and so I'd love to hear what your perspective on that is.
Thank you. So diversity embraces and encompasses a spectrum of human differences, whether it be race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, disability, socioeconomic status. All of those things give us a rich and tapestry of all of the things that we encompass. So that's diversity, is all of those differences. When I think about equity is really the cornerstone of ensuring that everybody, regardless of who you are, has access to the same things. They have the ability and opportunity and resources to advance, and that gives us our equity. And when I talk about inclusion, it's the act of fostering environment where everyone is valued, everyone's respected, everyone's voice is heard. And that's really kind of the linchpin that brings diversity and equity together, is inclusion, making sure that we're all valued and we can all be heard.
Thanks for those definitions, Candice. My understanding of it is they don't really operate in silos, that this is a package that comes together and they all have to work together. Is that correct?
Excellent. Just like you said, it's like when you have a quilt and you have all those beautiful threads, you have to include everything. So the diversity piece doesn't work if you don't have equity. You can't have equity if we're not keeping people included and making them feel valued and empowered. So they all have to work together.
Yeah, I always try to keep some shorthand in my brain about these things. And for me, diversity is just this idea that everyone has different lived experience. And it's not necessarily that it's that because you're part of a group, but that you're actually an individual with your own lived experience, and you bring that to the workplace. And then for equity, I remember that there's a very famous cartoon of these three people standing
yeah.
at a fence, and they're trying to see into a baseball field or a concert or something like that. And there's the wall is opaque, it's blocked, and there's holes at the top of the wall, but the people are different heights. And the shortest person can't see in, and the medium-sized person can't see in it, and the tall person can see in, right? Mm-hmm. And that is that's like inequality.
Yes.
And then, but equality would be giving them all the same size stool. Mm-hmm. And so then the tall person can still see in, the medium-sized person can't see it, and the small person can't see in. Because it's still they've been treated equally, but the person still doesn't have equity.
Yes.
And equity is actually lowering the holes in the wall so that you can see each person can see through with their abilities and with their characteristics. And then inclusion to me is I'm wearing my pin today.
Yeah.
But it's this is at the Geese College of Business where I work. We have it's sort of an inclusion framework that's called Seen, Value, Heard, Valued, Heard. And it's this whole idea of when we're in the workplace, we are, people see us for who we are. Our perspectives are valued and our voices are heard. And so to me, that I like trying to keep those things in mind when I'm talking about DEI.
I appreciate you mentioning how it applies to the workplace. So one of the things I wanted to talk about is why is it so important, not just in the tech field, but for higher education, why we really are intentional about DEI. So one of the most recent examples that comes to mind, and I'll go ahead and explain, even though I know that you're part of this example for the people, our listeners, I am part of the leadership team for the Women in Technology group on campus. It's a effort where we are focused on, building up women, as well as it's a very inclusive organization. So lots of people that do not define themselves as women, men, everyone are welcome to join. And we were concerned and curious about what goes on with IT Council, which is one of the governance bodies at our campus. And so we had reached out to IT Council at the time. I believe you were one of the people that we reached out to say, hey, can you come talk to us about what is IT Council? What's going on? Please come talk to our leadership about that. Do you remember this?
I do. And I do remember. And if I think back to that time, and this was, 2 or 3 years ago now, probably 3 years ago now. And I remember that at the time, IT Council, which is like our counterparts from around campus, all of the IT directors from the different IT units, it wasn't diverse at all.
Yeah.
Right. It was, if I looked around that room, almost everybody looked like me. There were a couple of women. There might have been one person of color. It was incredibly not diverse. And so some of us were trying to think of how do we increase the diversity of this group? So we reached out to Women in IT to learn about the group and to also talk about IT Council.
And so one of the things that I remember is as the members were sharing like their questions and concerns, as well as thoughts about IT Council, there was this like click of like, oh, have we ever heard these voices before? Have we ever heard these opinions? What are we missing? And I remember there was a idea about, when you're having these subcommittees where you're having all the people that you're asking to get involved at the operational level, sometimes strategic level, why are you not reaching out to all the units? We're like, oh, well, you've got a representative, so that's how it is. And having a wider reach. So being able to be very inclusive with like, hey, anybody that's in IT that would like to apply to be a part of the subcommittee was one of the suggestions that kind of came out of that.
Yeah, because
opportunity.
The way things were happening was, I don't want to characterize it as like an old boys club, but it's similar to that, right? That when we had opportunities for people, what we were doing was going into our back pockets and going, oh, who are the people we know that would be good for this? And all that does is it just creates this groupthink, right? It's all of our friends, all of our close colleagues get all the opportunities, and nobody outside that group gets it. And so being intentional, like making that change, and we've made that change in IT Council now, where those things go out more widely.
Right. And I think that's something that we celebrate at Women in IT, the group we do, because it really created a culture shift into how things operated for IT Council, how things operated for some of our larger groups, to be more inclusive and more intentional about bringing in outside perspectives. And so that showed this emergence of things can change if your voice is heard, if you can act on those changes. And so I really wanted to kind of mention that because I was like, oh, it was a tangible, this is how things can change if you include diversity, equity, inclusion. Now, I wanted to see, do you have any specific examples from Geese or from some of your experience with work for DEI?
Yeah. So when I took over as the director of IT at Geese in 2016, my team was only 8 people, I think. And there was one, among the technical staff, there was only one woman on the entire team. All rest were men. And since then, we've grown. We're, I think, at 36 positions now. We've had an enormous amount of growth, which is,
oh my goodness,
yeah, which is fantastic,
so
right? We are certainly very grateful for the fact that the college has invested so much in us. But we've been really intentional about building a team that is diverse. And we're now at, of those 36 positions, we're about 40% women. We probably need to do some more on the kind of racial and ethnic diversity. We definitely need to do more. But it has really just changed the face of our team. And this is across all different fields in IT. We have data folks that are women. We have programmers that are women. We have managers that are women. Of our 5 managers on the team, only 2 are men. So we've made a lot of progress in that area. And so that's like one piece of it. Like, what benefit do we get from this?
And before we talk about the benefit that we get from it, one of the things and one of the reasons why some of our DEI efforts fail, especially when pulling in a lot of women in IT or other things, is I feel sometimes they just focus on the diversity aspect. They're like, they're here. We got the women.
Yeah.
What do we do? And I'm like, you got to make sure they're included, that they feel like they're valued, that they feel like they're part of the team. And sometimes that takes some allyship. Sometimes it takes someone looking out for them, or you as the supervisor or you as a leader, regardless if you have any type of titles, to be an ally to that person. And so I wanted to kind of transition a little bit and talk about some allyship efforts and what people can do, those that are listening, when they don't know a lot about DEI, but how can they help in that regard?
Right. I think it's, for me, and the approach that I take is I'm always watching my team when we're in meetings together. And we have so much talent on our team that, like, I don't need to have the answers all the time. And generally, I kind of fade back and facilitate the conversations. I don't necessarily lead the subject matter in the conversations. And as with any team, there are a wide variety of confidence and communication skills and willingness to sort of put themselves in there, and ego and all of those kind of things. And my job is to balance that out to make sure that everybody's voice is heard. So if I see maybe one of the women on the team get sort of talked over or ignored, or an idea that gets put forward by somebody on the team doesn't just sort of gets swiped to the side, I may go back to that and say, hey, I want to really think about this idea that, if, let's say you were at the meeting, that Candice said, right? And point out that person brought this idea, and that I'm giving it some value by bringing it back up.
And I think that's great. It's like a great first step for allyship. And so one of the things that I remind people when I think about allyship is that you want to be an ally and not a knight in shining armor. Yeah. It's not about being rescued or saved, but it's really about an ally wants to implement systemic change so they can change the culture. And so instead of fixing one thing, you did a great job. You bring and amplify the voice that wasn't heard. I think about how can I fix the system versus just fixing that one thing. Like, oh, Candice was heard, but how can I change the culture? And so I might want to go back as the supervisor and say, we're trying to foster a conversation on how we don't talk over one another. Everyone's, let's do that so everyone can do that. And you're not the sole provider of, let me make sure every single voice is heard. There are some times where we feel like we have to fix it, but an ally really gives us the tools to fix the system. Right. So when we think about our hiring practices, when we think about all the ways we can come into the organization, instead of just hiring more people that are diverse, how can we fix the system that didn't allow them to get there in the first place?
Right. And I think a perfect example of that, that I learned at a leadership workshop that I was at years ago, was we had an HR specialist come into this leadership workshop, and she talked about writing job descriptions and how for some reason or another, women tend to look at the requirements on a job description, and if they don't meet 5 to 10% of the requirements, they won't even apply for the job. Whereas guys will look at that and be like,
I got this.
I only match 5% of this. I'm going to still apply, right? There's something of, whatever that reason is, right? Yeah, it's probably arrogance. It's overconfidence. It's, the way they've been socialized. But so how do we fix that? Like, how do we fix that systemically? And the answer is pretty easy. Limit your requirements on a job. You can put as much as you want in the preferred qualifications, but just limit the requirements to like the minimum. Like, and generally speaking for us, this is the education level you have, and this is the minimum number of years of experience that you have in this field. That's it, right? Everything else goes into requirements, and it gives us so much better diversity in our hiring
applicant
pools. I mean, like overnight that happened. And so there's these little things that we can do that just fix the system. So that's our rule now, like limit requirements on job descriptions.
Yeah. I'm glad that you're talking about fixing the system. So I know that we were talking and focusing some about work and how DEI is very important in higher ed and technology and specifics, but is there anything, do you remember like some of the first times that you were really introduced to DEI? You couldn't have always felt this way about diversity, equity, inclusion. Yeah. Can you think back to when you first had to think about any of those things.
Yeah. So it's interesting. And I'm going to go back like pretty far in my life. And
I'm ready.
I'll try to make this as short as I possibly can, but I grew up in an environment, in a family where I was not raised to be a progressive, right? As somebody who is like, that has DEI on the front of mind all the time. And I was thinking about this week as we were preparing for this, and it occurred to me that I was literally born 7 years after the passage of the Civil Rights Act. So that dates me. But
no judgment.
It occurred to me that like the environment that I grew up in, this was like still very much a major transition for our country. It was still, women didn't have the rights. People of color still didn't really have like full rights in the country. You could maybe argue that they don't have full rights yet. So I was in this environment, and that wasn't particularly open-minded. And I can give it some grace at this point in my life, because it was just, a few years after the Civil Rights Act was passed. It was early in the like maturity of our country from a DEI perspective. But I grew up in a neighborhood that was a blue collar neighborhood, and it was incredibly diverse. If I look back on that today, there were Black kids, there were Latino kids, there were Jewish kids, there were kids with developmental differences, and those were my friends. And that's what, they were just people to me. They were kids that I was out there, and they all had different life experiences. Their families were different, their cultures were different, their food was different. And that's just what I grew up with. And I think that I wasn't certainly thinking of that when I was an 8-year-old running around playing kickball or whatever. But looking back on it now, I really think that helped me sort of get out of the that mindset that I was kind of, I don't know if I was intentionally raised in it, but like my environment raised me into that.
Right. When you're around others that have differences than you, then the curtain's lowered. So you're understanding their
and I went to private school almost my entire life. My family was like very Catholic. I went to Catholic school. I went to Notre Dame in college. So my educational environment wasn't particularly diverse, but my neighborhood was, right? And some of the workplaces that I had were. And so I think that really helped me, because it's exposure to others. And I think when you start to get to know people that are different than you, that have a different lived experience than you, and you start to care about them, right? I think that's the connection, piece. Right? You have empathy for them. You start to hear their stories. You start to understand them. You're more willing to fight for them, right? That's either you're more willing to support them in the challenges that they're having, because you understand them better.
I was raised in a area where it was very diverse and things of that nature. But I also went to University of Illinois, which is a PWI, a predominantly white institution. So there are pockets of diversity, or pockets of places where you can go your entire day without seeing someone that looks like me, depending on what my degree is or what my major is. But one of the things that I appreciated about when I first had kids is I wanted to raise them in an environment where it was going to be inclusive and they were going to feel included. And I was like, yeah. Also, I was really concerned because my kids are biracial children. So I wanted them to have a sense of identity from all walks of their cultures. And it was disheartening to me that when I started to bring them to grocery stores or parks and things like that there were so many microaggressions that they would experience as a small child. Like immediately people wanted to label or figure out what they were. It was like my oldest was probably like 2, and somebody was like, "What are you?" And he was like, what are you talking about? And he would spread out his name. I'm such and such. Yeah. And they were like, no, like I need to figure out what box to put you in ethnically. Like, are you Black? Are you white? Are you Hispanic? Like, hola, like what's going on here? And the same thing would happen when they got into schooling and system. There were just so many things that I didn't want them to experience. And so I tried to protect them from that. But instead, I decided I can't protect you from this. I'm going to help you work through this and make sure that you can have the right language and you can have the right ability to talk about these things. So when people have questions or they are saying things that are problematic or racist or sexist or various other things, that you can ask the right questions so that you are speaking up for yourself and giving yourself that power of voice. And I did that to those small children, but you can do this at any age. And so I wanted to, we have lots of listeners that may not be 18 or older. And so I wanted to let them know that you can do this at any time. If you're hearing something, just use your power of voice and ask those questions. There are questions that you can ask that make a difference.
Yeah. Candice, I think it's amazing that you've empowered your children to sort of stand up for themselves in a world that maybe doesn't understand them. And I think there are a lot of people out there that have grown up in a relatively, I'll call it a closed environment, right? They haven't been exposed to a lot of diversity, and they might see somebody that's different than them. And even if they're not like antagonistic towards that person, their curiosity about that person can objectify the person, right? In a way that, treats them like they're
less than
or some sort of like object or like from, this is the wrong term, but I think like from outer space, like they're so different that it's almost something to like go and see and inspect and that sort of thing. That's like ridiculous. Like, because if we were to do that, if someone were to do that to us,
they'd have done this to me. And that's why I can't hold back. Like, I used to have this wall of microaggressions when I had worked at the system level that I would kind of keep track of. And I, at one point, would just put little ticks. And one week it got to like 10 ticks. I got a new hairstyle. I changed my hairstyle every like quarter or whatever. And people just came up, touched my hair. Oh, this is great. Where'd you get this? And these are supervisors, people I work with. I'm about to lead a meeting. Why are you touching me? I am not a doll. And, I do the swerve method of do not touch my hair. But these are things that then I had to prepare other people for, because I've never felt inclined to go touch someone's hair at work and go, oh, you got a new curly haircut? Oh, this is... And when I brought this up, I had to actually speak. I speak up for myself, come as a grown person, but this is not appropriate. This is why we don't, not that I felt like my hair needed, but...
So that kind of reminds me, and I take a little bit of a tangent here, I think, but in summer of 2020, when, George Floyd killing, the whatever you want to call it, the racial reckoning in the United States, there were a lot of people, and I think a lot of people like me, who feel like we're in the right headspace around DEI issues. We want to be supportive of people of all walks of life, of all backgrounds. We wanted to understand more. And so we came to people like you and said, help me understand. Help yourself. Right? How did that feel when we got to that point?
It was emotionally draining, because we're also trying to heal ourselves. We need safe spaces, but I want to, I'm a champion of DEI. So I'm like, oh, here's what you can read. Here's what you can do. But I can't save everything. You can't. You have to build up allies to do that for you. But I had to really kind of put safe guidelines and say, I'm not in the headspace to talk about this. However, here's some resources that you may want to talk to, or maybe you want to talk to other colleagues that look like you, and you guys figure out what you need to do, because I'm done. I'm done trying to shepherd you on the way to your path to DEI. Oh, I want to learn more now, Candice. Why are you blocking me out? I'm like, I need some space. I need some space to decompress. I need to emotionally not be drained. I cannot lead your DEI effort right now. Please do not send me another email. Don't ask me to be on another committee.
Yeah, and in some ways, it's just a step away from coming and saying, oh, your hair is so interesting, right? It's like, you have a certain skin tone, so therefore you have to teach me. And it's I can imagine how exhausting
emotional labor
that
it can be. It's like, that's when this wasn't even that long ago, maybe about 10 years ago. At one point, we have at the University of Illinois, we're all about inclusion. It's a big thing that we work on. And for our hiring practices for search committees, they want to make sure that the makeup is very diverse. And at one point, I think in the span of 3 months, I was on 12 search committees. And I thought it was like a new job. Like, my job was to be on search committees and bring in all people that were IT. If you had a job in the last 10 years and it was IT, I probably had a part of bringing you to this organization.
Yeah.
It was tiring, but I learned to say not necessarily no, but pivot, because I was young in my career at the time, and I was just like, yes, of course, these are great opportunities to network and collaborate. And I felt like it was tokenism at first. It was just like, you're here for the sake of being there. And when I mentioned tokenism, it's like tokenism is diversity without the equity and inclusion part. It's not really allowing the person to be empowered or give their voice. Now, I wouldn't say that I did that when I tried to speak up as much as I could and do that, but I see that happen sometimes where I'll be at a event, a conference, and I'm not part of that organization, but they take that photo op and then it becomes the main page, like banner or bumper. And I'm like, I don't even belong to this group. But yet, because they saw, oh, there's a woman of color here. Oh, and she's hanging out with this other person. This is a great picture. Click. And it's not representative of what the organization does.
And you see that in like all kinds of marketing materials for the university, even today. I mean, we are an increasingly diverse campus, but if you look at the marketing materials, it looks like we're like the ultimate diverse campus, right? And there's a certain aspect of, we need to do that to attract a more diverse, but at the same time, it's like, is it authentic? Like, is it really showing what the place is really like?
We talked about the last time we had these podcasts that we wanted to have these moments of vulnerability, not that we need to cry or various other things, but I wanted to take this opportunity to kind of allow you to have that space of like, where do you still struggle when it comes to DEI? What are you scared about? What worries you? Let us know.
So I'll be perfectly honest here. Like leading up to having this conversation, like it did cross my mind, this Chris, don't get yourself canceled, right? And having a conversation about DEI with a woman of color, like don't say the wrong thing. And I think that there are a lot of people like me, white men, who kind of feel like we're on eggshells sometimes, even if we feel like our heart and minds are in the right direction on this, that we're on the right side of history with this. There's still this fear of saying the wrong thing, right? And not, and just that whatever group that you say it in will have a reaction. And I don't want to classify it as an overreaction, but will have a reaction that maybe feels less proportional than it should be, right? And so I think we're at this place where, as a society, there's not enough room for people to make mistakes. People whose heart and minds are in the right place, there's not enough room for them to make mistakes and recover from those mistakes. So I'd love to hear your kind of feeling about that, because I think it in some ways holds back progress, because if I feel like I'm going to get crucified because I made that mistake, I might just back out of the conversation completely.
I think that's how we learn. We learn through those mistakes. And as long as I wouldn't even say your heart's in the right place, because that's what I want to tell people. Say, as long as you're genuine about it, people are going to make mistakes. Let's say you use the wrong terminology or you do stuff. When you are in a space where someone is trying to teach you or help you on your path and journey to learning, they're going to correct you and allow you to do better the next time. Now, where I get frustrated is when people have taken the feedback and they don't implement those changes. And so it's okay if you make a mistake, apologize for the mistake, own it, and then move forward. But if you're not apologizing for it, you're like, oh yeah, whatever, and you're continuing to make the same mistakes, not including people, that's where there's a problem. But everybody makes mistakes. I make mistakes all the time, and I've been working in DEI efforts all of like my life.
Yeah. I think that there's on my reminder board in my office, there's a phrase that's acknowledge, apologize, and act like you mean it. Right. And I think maybe that's the answer here is, take a little bit more risk, say, hey, or even before you say something, ask a question, right? Say, I'm not quite sure how to say this. I'm not quite sure how you'd like to be addressed. I don't know what, help me understand this a little bit more so that I can do the thing that is respectful to you.
Yeah, no, that's Like Miss Frizzle from the Magic School Bus, there's that song where there's that phrase where it says, make mistakes, take chances, get messy, like all of that.
Yeah.
That's very important, not just for children. You can learn from Miss
Yeah.
Frizzle as an adult.
As an aside, my wife just had to introduce me to the Magic School Bus like 3 months ago because I have never ever seen it.
What?
See, I told you I
You
was
were
I
very
was
sheltered.
I was well, you told me I told you I was born 7 years after the Civil Rights Act was passed. So I think there's just a little bit of a generational difference there.
It's okay.
But I appreciate it. I get the point. The other place where I think I struggle is I can sometimes get overconfident in this space and think, I know what I'm doing here, and I don't listen enough.
Okay.
And I think that's the thing that really makes a difference for someone who's in a position like I am, who grew up in the background that I am. It's not like what we were talking about before, where, I have to ask all of these people that are different than me to educate me, but just simply listening to their stories and creating the space for them to voluntarily share their stories so I understand them better. And if I think about like all of when you were defining diversity at the beginning, all of the different sort of ways in which you can be diverse or different from each other, the places, those, if I look down that continuum of things, the places where I struggle the most or where I don't have people in my life that fit that category or have or are different than I am in that particular way, right?
Yeah.
I will, I'll freely admit that I was late to the game on supporting LGBTQ plus rights, right? Absolutely late to the game. I didn't have a single soul in my life that I knew and cared about that was an issue for. So it wasn't my issue, right? And so that's the thing that if I go down that list, the places where I still sort of struggle and maybe have some discomfort in are the places where I don't have somebody in my life or some buddies in my life that share that experience.
But that self-recognition is important, that you've already identified, hey, how can I connect with some other people that are not like me so that I can have that empathy for those individuals. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. How about you? Like where, I think I have always looked at you as somebody who like has it together when it comes to DEI. I'm sure there are tons of other people on our campus that sort of look at you as a leader in this space, but I'm sure you have struggles as well.
I do. Similar to your struggles, that there's diversity is defined by so many different avenues and human differences that I don't know everything about every single human difference. But mine is more of making sure that individuality is still appreciated. I don't want people to think of me as a monolith when I show up and I'm myself. They go, oh, woman, cool, this is what women think. Oh, Black woman, this is what Black women think. And then that becomes like the sole argument for things. And so I struggle making sure that my individuality shines bright, but I am representing my cultures every time I come around. There's some things I can hide because they're not visible, like religion or socioeconomic status, but there's some things that I will never be able to turn off. When I come in, that's what they're going to see. And so it's not that I shy away from it, but I want to be seen more as I am Candice and I offer all of these things in addition to my culture versus Black woman. Cool, this is what they think. And so sometimes I still struggle with trying to prove myself that I'm more than the label that people have already placed upon me.
It's that danger of a single story, right?
Yeah.
And I think that to sort of bring a term into the conversation here that I think maybe a lot of people misunderstand is this idea of intersectionality.
Yes.
Right? That all of these cultures, all of these backgrounds that we have, they all intersect with one another, and that each of us as individuals is sort of that like crazy, insane Venn diagram of all of those different ways that we've experienced life.
Pardon the interruption. This is Chris. I'd like to take a moment to clarify something I just said. I use the term intersectionality when discussing how people have multiple identities that overlap, while intersecting identities refers to the simple fact that each of us holds multiple identities, such as race, gender, class, and so on. Intersectionality is a more specific concept. Coined by scholar Kimberly Crenshaw, It refers to how these identities interact with systems of power and oppression. Intersectionality highlights that our experiences are shaped not just by our individual identities, but by how society treats these identities when they come together. It helps us understand the complexity of discrimination and privilege in a more nuanced way. Now back to the rest of the podcast.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Chris, for being able to have this conversation today and be open to, putting yourself out there potentially to be canceled, but you were not, and to just allow me to talk through some of these things that are very important to me.
Yeah, it's a fantastic conversation, Candice. Always enjoy kind of diving into these topics with you. And this one is just incredibly important. It's important to you. It's important to me. I think it's important to so many of the people that are listening or watching our podcast. So really thank you for the conversation. It's been amazing, and we will see you all next episode.
Thanks.
Yeah.